Yes, please. Okay, so I guess we have reached the appointed hour for the start of this ESIP RDA Earth, Space and Environmental Science Interest Group session entitled New Developments in Earth and Environmental Science Data Infrastructures and Repositories. I'm Helen Glaves, and the other co-chairs for this group are Shelley Stall, Danny Kincaid, Leslie Wyborn, and Pedro Correa, who are all on the call this evening. Next slide, please, Leslie. So just to say something very quickly about the objectives for this session. So the RDA ESIP Space and Environmental Sciences Interest Group is focused on coordinating and harmonizing multiple international efforts, both in general and domain-specific data infrastructure development, vocabularies, and common digital services. And what the group is about really we're trying to reduce possible duplication, increase efficiency, share use cases, and promote partnerships and adoption in the community. And so the objectives of this session will be to continue mapping the landscape of Earth, space and environmental data infrastructures and vocabulary resources, but also further refinement of the ESIG catalogues. So during this session, we're going to be showcasing 6 new projects and also giving an update on an existing one. We'll also be introducing and setting up 2 new working groups as part of this interest group session today. Next slide, please, Leslie. So this is the agenda for the meeting for today. I would encourage you to also take a look at the collaborative notes, because as the name suggests, they are collaborative. So if you want to add something, please do. And at the very least, please add your name into the table so that we know who's actually participated in this session. Shelley has just very kindly put the agenda and the collaborative notes link in the chat. So please do just jump in there and just add your name. And also if you've got anything you want to add to the notes. Next slide, please, Leslie.
Okay, so that was, we've covered that. Oh, and then the interest page, please join. Please join if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Leslie. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight to the first agenda item, which is we're going to do a review of the current status of some of the supporting outputs from this group. And Leslie, I'm going to hand over to you for giving this update. So Leslie, away you go.
Okay, so again, if you go into the notes, there are links to our 2 key source catalogues. Both of these are bottom up. One is on infrastructures and projects that are building data sharing infrastructures, anything to do with Earth and space sciences, or collaborative ones that are multidisciplinary that have the Earth and space sciences. And since the last meeting, there have been a few additions to us. But what I'd like to do is more highlight the semantic resources or vocabulary ontology, whatever you want to call it, catalogue. And so from both, please add what you can, particularly if you're in the global south. And I reiterate what Helen said, we're bottom up. We want to leverage activities and stop reinventing the wheel. Now, I just want to focus on the semantic vocab resources. There's a lot of work going on across the space on vocabularies, and in particular, there's people with the move to machine learning AI. We need to get our scientific content machine actionable. And at the recent DataCon session, there were 3 sessions that actually looked and highlighted our catalogue. And so I'm after suggestions from people put them in the notes page or maybe even the catalogue as to what we do with it. We don't have the resources to make this a formal registry like the OBO ontology registry. We don't know whether there is another one that we could put it in, but I think it's getting beyond the stage of just being a relaxed, crowdsourced Google Sheets that's attached to this. And I'm not willing to kind of make it into an RDA output in its current form because it's not then dynamic and we won't be able to keep adding to it. And one suggestion has been proposed is that the CoData decadal plan on making data work for cross-domain challenges, and I've got the links, and they produced an article called a paper 10 simple rules for making vocabulary fair. So another suggestion has been is that we get serious about some of the stronger vocabularies that are on this list. And CoData has already set up a working group with the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population Fair Vocab Groups. And so what it means is that we're getting the benefit of being able to link with CoData through to the science unions that give us the imprimatur on the content, but also the technological expertise to try and make these fair. So again, please just, we're a bottom-up group, put suggestions as to where we go forward. But the bottom line is, we need to, I think, seriously upgrade it from a Google sheet and get a proper registry of some sort. So anyway, that's just my suggestions. I don't know whether we've got time for anyone to in the audience to actually give some recommendations, or has anyone got a quick suggestion? Okay, well, look, just contact me, or as I said, there's the chat and there's the document, but please help because I don't know where to go with it. And it's been sort of a successful output from this group. And so, as we say, volunteer your news into either catalogue. We want to know about new projects and new funding. And more importantly, if you come along with a new project, do let us know because we'll give you a spot on our program at the next RDA plenary. So I think now we'll move into the lightning presentations, and we've got a series of, we ended up with 6. So unfortunately, one of them dropped out at the last minute. But I think we will now hand over to Peng, because this is an interesting group that's developed fair guidelines for information quality on sharing individual Earth science data sets. Okay, so over to you, Peng.
Hey, everybody. Do I hear okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce the guidelines to you. And I like to acknowledge the co-lead and the other members of International Fair Datasets Quality Information Community Guidelines Working Group. And this is a global community effort co-organized by the ESIP Information Quality Cluster. ESIP, as you all know, it's supported primarily by NASA, NOAA, USGS, US government agencies, and in collaboration with the evaluation and quality control team from Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and as well as the Australia and New Zealand Data Quality Interest Group. That's many members there are part of E2 ZP, Z2 ESIP, the second ESIP group down in Australia. Next, please. So the working group consists of 22 international domain experts from data management and scientists and informatics, as well as the data system, and over 7 countries. And we have more than 22 affiliations in governmental, academic, and private sectors. And they are involved in and have expert knowledge from every life cycle stage of a data set. And so far we have the guideline document. The first baseline has been released that has gone through rigorous community reviews. And our next step is to improve the discipline diversity by engaging RDA community, potentially establish a working group on sharing data quality information by making it fair. And we also collaborating with OGC in develop use cases in order to demonstrate new use cases for quality information and providing use cases for implementations. Next, please. I'm not going to go through all the details, just a quick outline of 5 guidelines we have developed in this document. The first one is to recommend described data sets, so that to ensure the data set is findable and accessible. The second guideline is to encourage people to use a structured quality assessment model and also capture it so the model is findable, accessible. The guidelines 3 and 4 is to help include quality information in such a way that's interoperable and reusable for machine end users, and findable, accessible, and reusable for human users. And the guideline 5 emphasize on reporting and disseminate the quality information in such a way that can be easily findable, accessible, and readily usable. Thank you. And I will put the, I think it's the link to the document is in the document, in the slides, but I'll put that in the chat as well.
Thank you, Peng. Now we'll move to the GEO, which is one of the largest global projects in earth science, earth and environmental science data. And I'll ask Helen to give us an update on the Geo Insitu Data strategy.
Great, thank you, Leslie. So I just want to quickly say something about the group on Earth observation in general, for those people who are not familiar with it. GEO is basically an international partnership that's made up of member states, participating organizations, and associates from the private sector. At the moment, GEO has 113 member countries and 139 participating organizations, plus 19 associates. So as Leslie rightly pointed out, this is a large activity within the earth and environmental science space. GEO is focused on working to improve accessibility and availability to allow open use of Earth observation data, and this includes satellite imagery, remote sensing, and in situ data. And the intention is to make this data more openly available and readily available for reuse to both impact policy and decision in a wide range of sectors, but also support a number of priority areas, and I'll come back to that. At the moment, the GEO's work programme has over 60 activities in a wide range of domains, such as agriculture, monitoring, water quality assessment, and urban planning. And GEO also has 3 engagement priorities, which are the 2030 UN Agenda for Sustainable Development. So these are the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Next slide, please, Leslie. Oh, that doesn't look good. It's blank. That looks a bit better, Leslie.
Stop.
That's fine. That's okay, Leslie. Thank you. So I just want to focus on a little bit, focus in a little bit now on one particular aspect of the GEO program, which is the data working group and one of its subgroups, the In Situ Data subgroup. So the in situ data subgroup has actually been established for coordination of the in situ data community within GEO. And this has been highlighted as being important within GEO through declarations from several ministerial summits, which have actually called for strengthening of this coordination. And the GEOS in situ observation resources task team report in 2018 highlighted the need and the potential benefits for greater coordination of in situ data within the GEO space. So in 2020, GEO established a new data working group, and this was actually convened to work with the GEO community, but also external stakeholders to address data policy, data ethics, and data governance issues impacting the use of Earth observations. And there were a number of key action areas identified, and these were in situ data, data ethics, law and policy, and data sharing and data management principles. I'm not going to say any more about these particular topics, but if you want to know more, you can find more information on these priority areas on the slide, please, Leslie. So as part of the work that the in situ subgroup of the GEO data working group has been undertaking is the development of an in situ data strategy. And I just want to say a little bit about the drivers for this. Part of the initial focus and the reason for developing this strategy is because the in situ data landscape is rapidly evolving and fragmented, and it's been identified as a challenge for GEO. But also another key driver for the development of this strategy was in the Canberra Declaration from the GEO Ministerial Summit in 2019 that recognised the critical role of in situ data that was collected from the atmosphere, land and water, and the importance it plays for achieving GEO's mission, which basically is that which I outlined in the first slide. So there were calls for GEO to develop a community strategy to address challenges in this area and also to develop progress in implementation. And this has recently been followed by a request from the GEO Programme Board to provide a focused in situ strategy document. Last slide, please, Leslie. So the in situ data strategy, as it stands at this point in time, and I should emphasize, this is very much a work in progress at this time, but it's like the main activities and priorities for developing the GEO data strategy at this point is around characterization, of the in situ data landscape, which is basically looking at what are the common barriers to data sharing and reuse. So we're looking at formats, licensing, incentives for sharing, but also what are the costs associated with sharing, and why do these present a barrier for some key data providers. The other thing is we're looking at identifying, mapping, but also gap analysis of in situ data providers within the GEOS platform, and also looking at how we can engage with existing networks focused on domain level coordination of in situ data. And this is where we see a very clear link between the work that's happening in GEO at this point in time and RDA. And we also, and this group, this particular interest group, is seen as that linkage between this activity in GEO and a variety of different actions in RDA. So we're currently working on a first set of strategic objectives and also looking at developing an in situ data mission statement for GEO. But one of the other key things that we're currently doing is looking at a number of practical use cases that can demonstrate the benefit of integrating in situ data with other Earth observation data that not only supports GEO's engagement priority areas for users, but also can be adopted more widely within the data in situ data provider community. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about this, as I mentioned, one of the earlier slides, there is a link to the Geo website where you can find more information. I will provide another update on how this work is developing through this group at a later date. So thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Helen. So if you've gone from the absolute giant size organization in Earth and environmental science, I think we're going to now go down to a minnow. And the minnow is a new initiative called One Geochemistry. And I would like to invite Martha to present on it.
Thanks, Leslie. So yeah, the One Geochemistry initiative is something that was first brought to life by Leslie and Kerstin Lehnert, and things sort of really only started kicking off in April this year at EGU, and the group is still growing. Next slide, please. So the reason, motivation behind this initiative is the fact that the geochemical landscape is very fragmented. So geochemical data are very diverse, and they're sort of the definition of long tail data. And it's really hard to find a sort of a standard common framework to provide access to these data. So that means that at the moment there are no community standards to store or provide data. And instead what you have is a number of sort of smaller databases and sort of essentially thematic or institutional silos that don't coordinate. And there are more of these popping up every day pretty much, and there's clearly an increased use and sort of demand from the community to provide a sort of a common joint access to geochemical data. So what we need at this stage is for these individual silos, these smaller databases, to somehow join together to be able to connect and provide consistent data. Next slide, please. So the vision of One Geochemistry is to set up or to provide a global data network to provide data discovery and access. And it's sort of envisioned as a distributed architecture where these individual databases still exist, but they all enforce and adhere to common community agreed standards, and therefore can easily exchange data. So what we need for that is to sit down and actually agree on these standards. So that's one of the main goals of One Geochemistry. Next slide. So this is where we are at the moment. On the left here is just a few of the current participants in the initiative. And we're currently in the process of creating a sort of a more formal organizational framework that will then allow us to sit down and talk about these standards. And it will also then make it possible for others to participate and join. And sort of on the right-hand side is where we're aiming for, I guess, in terms of a system structure, where in the middle you've got the network or framework of these interconnected databases or data systems. The service that network provides is very much driven by the community needs, but there's also a very strong link and sort of support and endorsement from the funders and the societies. So that's what we're aiming for. Thank you.
Okay, so now we do something that I keep trying to do or the chairs we keep trying to do in every session, is try and get participants from the Global South or projects in the Global South to present. And fingers crossed, we have this presentation now on transforming water climate through the in-situ observation geoservices in Africa.
We have no audio, Leslie.
Sorry, what was that, Helen?
We can't hear the audio.
Oh gosh, how do can anyone advise how to get the audio?
You can share your screen with audio optimized. It's a tiny little boxes on the bottom left. So I recommend stop sharing your screen.
Stop share.
Now go again. And at the very bottom, before you hit the green button, there's these little boxes and the right one says optimize for audio.
Sorry,
For video.
I go share screen.
Yep, bottom left,
Bottom left.
optimize for video.
Is that when I share the screen?
When you're selecting the windows to share.
Oh, optimize for
So-
video clip.
Yep.
Right, and
There you
now
go.
go.
Okay.
And so why isn't it happening?
Give it a go now.
Yeah, that's not working. So Leslie, can I suggest that you drop the link in the chat and then people can have a look at this video at their leisure later?
Okay, all right, it's actually, yep, okay.
Would you like me to give it a go?
Yeah, can you, have you got the videos?
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you spend a moment talking about the gentleman who's about to speak, and I'll have the video ready.
And there may be a second option in the screen sharing that is to share system audio. I have a vague recollection of having seen that in the past.
Yeah, that's usually what we see. There should be a checkbox that says share video audio.
No.
Okay, I have it.
Okay, thanks. So I'll stop sharing
Thank you.
and you go.
Cross your fingers.
The Twiga project seeks to develop what we call geo-services. Now that sounds strange maybe, but what we mean is we want to provide people with information that they can use to better deal with things like weather, climate, water resources. And we do that by developing new, what we call in situ, on-the-ground measurements of different aspects of the hydrological cycle. And based on that, we try to build these new services that will help people to deal with things like rough weather.
Twiga is part of the GeoGlows initiative, and GeoGlows is aiming to stimulate global water sustainability. Of course, Twiga is doing other things as well, but this is where we find our place in the framework of the group on Earth observations. Apart from that, this group has regular gatherings where we exchange experiences, and what is really interesting in Twiga, because it's about in situ observations and in situ observations in Africa, is that when you do the Earth observation, it's not only what you can see with the satellites, but it is also what you can see on the ground.
Okay, that looks like it.
I believe that's it.
Okay, so you stop sharing your screen. I'll share mine. Okay. Present. Ugh, technology. Okay, so our next presentation is from Pedro Correa. He's going to give us an update on the Parsec project, which is one of the projects we've been following for some time. So over to you, Pedro.
Thank you, Leslie. I will talking about the update dictionary and vocabulary work in the project of Parsec Project. I put the link of Parsec Project in the chat. The Parsec Project is a Belmont project supported by 4 different countries: Brazil, US, France, and Japan. And this project, the main objective of this project is to investigate the socioeconomic indicators of protected areas in the world in general, mainly in this in 5 countries: Brazil, US, France, Japan, and Australia. Please, next slide, Leslie. Yes, during the next slide.
That's me.
Oops.
Yeah, there we are.
Yeah, during the project, we developed some towers for digital output management plan and a workbook. And the first link that we can see here is this link for the data management for this project. This project is developing a lot of experiments of data science experiment, involve machine learning, involve images, involve a lot of data. So we need to document this data. We need to document this, the data that we are acquiring from different data sources. So in the first time, we developed some towers for document this dictionary using a spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is good, but is not good enough for everyone use or for share for our team. This project is very complex because it involves researchers from different countries, different language. So we need to share so much data set, metadata related with this data set that we collected. So we have a problem to manage the metadata and manage the dictionary between the researchers inside of project. So in order to ensure the compliance with policies procedures described in the Parsec output management plan, we decided to develop a tool that could automate and organize and manage the data sets, attributes, metadata, and rules used mainly in your data set that you are collecting for different data sources and different repositories. So please, next slide. We call data map. Data map is the data dictionary is part of data map project. The data map project, we are, of course, is part of Parsec project. This tool is integrated with open science framework, is integrated with some open science framework is a user interface for general user. So for example, every researchers in the project could access, for example, the dictionary, the data dictionary. We can insert information about the data dictionary. So we can share the information about the data set that you are using in the experiments from different profiles of users. So for example, the developers can use the same data dictionary using some APIs. So this API is available for example, for visualization of for data exploration of our data set. So we can use this for the data map for different users profile, from the researchers that can access the data dictionary and the developers. So next next slide, please. Yes, just to tell you, as I told you before, the data dictionary is part of the data map application, that the data map tool. So the data is related with data sets that we are using in the experiments of Parsec Project. And the main function of the data dictionary is share for the shared data with different profiles of user, different profiles of that can access the data dictionary. This is the main idea. So next slide, please. We are working in this tool that this tool we can access this tool using your ORCID access. So you can access with ORCID, or we can access using your OSF account, for example. The idea is this tool can access the metadata that could be provided by the FAIR repository that could provide the metadata related with data sets. So we can use this kind of features of, for example, the repository. So we can import this metadata from the repository, and we can use locally in the project for the researchers, the investigators could explore the data, and the developers can use the same metadata using access the API. And another important characteristic is that this tool will be supported 5 different languages: English, Spanish, French, Japanese, and Brazilian Portuguese. This is the main features that we are working in this moment. So thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you, Pedro. Now we'll move on to our last short presentation. But before I do, I'd like to remind you that this is actually the ESIP/RDA. So it's a joint interest group in RDA on Earth, Space, and Environmental Science data. And our first lightning presentation on data quality was coming out of a cluster in ESIP. And this is another one, which is the ESIP Data Management Clearinghouse, and where Carl and Nancy want to highlight sort of internationally what they're doing in this work. So over to you, Carl.
Thanks, Leslie. And yeah, what we're providing some information about here is a project that's been going on for about 3 years now, which is working with the Data Management Training Clearinghouse that was originally developed between 2015 and 2018, actually going on live online in 2016, through a collaboration between the U.S. Geological Survey, Community for Data Integration, Data One, and ESIP, as an effort to build the capability to develop and maintain globally accessible collection of curated and well-documented learning resources. And what we have been doing since 2018 with our funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services and contributions from ESIP and the Science Gateways Community Institute is essentially working on an enhanced version of the DMTC to be able to enhance the underlying metadata model, the search capabilities based on that metadata model, diversify and certainly expand the collection of materials in the system, and also develop assessment capabilities that we can then publicly provide to allow for collection of feedback on the learning resources that are registered in the clearinghouse. Next slide. And as we've been moving forward on the project, you can see on the left part of the slide here some of the trend lines for some of those collection enhancement capabilities that I was talking about in terms of the number of subject areas that are represented in the collection and the growth in those different subject areas. As you might imagine, given the original organizations, there was a strong earth science focus when the clearinghouse was originally started. We've had a particular focus on diversifying beyond earth sciences in the collection. You can see the growth in the collection. And I might mention also the growing backlog of materials that we have initially captured in the repository, but haven't yet run through our curation process. So if you're looking for a place where you might be able to help in developing metadata for training materials, please let me know and we can find some interesting materials for you to work with. And similarly, looking at the bottom there, the learning end users, essentially, the target audiences for training materials. On the right, you can see some examples of the user interface that we have developed on top of the new platform. And now we can move to the next slide. And the key capability for the overall system is a new platform for managing all of the metadata. And in this case, focusing on the assessment capabilities, which is our most recent area of focus, where we have extended that application programming interface to provide web services for developing and managing individual questions, then predefined groups of questions, each of which are then reusable and can be mixed and matched to create customized surveys for each learning resource. We're starting out by creating a general survey that we can apply to all the learning resources, but there's a very powerful assessment engine sitting behind under the hood, essentially, for being able to provide pretty much an unlimited number of surveys that could be linked to one or more learning resources we have in the collection. We just have at the top of this some examples of an unstyled rendering in HTML of one of the surveys, and then the highlighting that we're also providing through the API JSON representations of all of the assessment capabilities. And finally, I'd like to then just quickly talk about what our next steps are in the project on the next slide. We basically are at the point now where we're working on completing the user interface development for the assessment capabilities, being able to integrate ESIP's ORCID membership information and login capabilities so that there's a significantly streamlined approach for being able to authenticate users, develop our user interface for actually interacting with our application programming interface for resource submission and management, complete the additional documentation and guidance around sustainability, our governance code and participation and those items. And then finally to go live with the completed enhanced system by the essentially the end of the extended project at the end of June 22. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions or pass the baton back to Leslie.
Okay. Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we need to move on to our breakouts. Now, we're not having 4 breakout sessions. This is agenda item 4 on breakout sessions. And we're having 2 breakout sessions, one on complex citation and the second on coordinating ESES data preservation scholarly publication. Again, I'd point out that the second one is one that we've had bubbling along as breakouts, both within this RDA group and also in the ESIP January and July meetings. The complex citation comes out of some work that Shelley and a few others have been doing in AGU. So what I'm now going to ask is Shelley and Danny to give us a really quick 1-slide presentation of, I'm not going to call it a sales pitch, but an introduction to what they're going to talk in their breakouts, and allow you, the audience, to choose which breakout you want to go to. How the breakouts will work is we'll probably have, say, 30 minutes together, and then we'll have a breakout where get together where each breakout has 5 minutes to give us an overview of what they discussed. Okay, so now I'll just give over to Shelley for her, oh God, what do we call it? Sales pitch? You know, Shelley, you probably got a better word, but go for it.
Sales pitch. All right. So both of our topics are very good. This particular one, my sales pitch is leaving me. Leslie, bring it back. What we've run into on both the repository and the journal side is a real challenge with trying to cite a large number of data sets or digital objects, or thank you, or even a bunch of images. And this can render itself in different ways. When it comes to publication, we're asking the authors to cite everything they're using for their research. And of course, we have disciplines where there are a number of data sets or other digital objects, and it's not possible. The journals aren't really equipped to have 100 citations in the reference section. And it's not because they technically can or cannot. Some of them actually have some limits, but it's such a culture change for them. And we get a lot of pushback on having that many citations within the reference section that are for data or software. And that culture change is hard enough. And there were enough use cases around needing to package up a large number of digital objects that it made sense for us to try to come up with an answer. And you can see that also happening around the work that's happening with the IPCC reports, where they've got a number of models and input data enforcing factors that are coming into these packages. And the important element here is not necessarily how we cite, but that each of the elements that are being cited gets credit. So if you, so I'll tell you about what we're up to. And
okay, that's enough. Danny, over to you. What's going to happen in your breakout?
All right, elevator pitch number 2. So this breakout group is really trying to introduce the concept of a working group centered around coordinating the workflows between the repository and the journal for data publication. So as publishers are increasingly requiring that data be deposited in a repository and curated so that it can be referenced in the scholarly publication, great move forward, but the domain repositories, of which I am a manager of, are increasingly becoming stressed and taxed under the short time turnaround for authors who want to deposit their data and immediately get a DOI to run to the journal for publication. And so I thought maybe the best way to illustrate what we're trying to get at is for just a perfect example, which if you look at the slide, you'll see email from a researcher who is submitting data. And they're submitting data to the repository that I happen to manage called BeGoodEmo. And researcher says, hey, I'm attaching all my data and all the metadata necessary for my paper that's been accepted in Journal X, and you'll find all the information you need. I think we have some time here because Journal X is typically slower than my other Journal Y that I publish in, and so we'd love to have the DOIs if you can manage this. So as domain repositories take time to curate and open and document the data files that are being submitted, it's really tough to turn them around. If you notice the date on the left, January 7th, by January 9th, researcher comes back and says, oh, what a bummer. Gosh, it's been accepted, and I need the DOIs right now. And can you turn this around quickly? And so for these small curation facilities, it's really challenging to do. So we educate this individual, and by January 10th, he's saying, I understand, but what would happen if I come to you before I even know my paper's accepted and ask for the DOI, and then it doesn't get accepted. And of course, we want to provide clarity on this whole situation, communicate with the repository, communicate with the journals. So have repositories and journals come together to understand where these friction points are and try and resolve them so that the researcher isn't stuck with very little information trying to navigate this landscape. And we want to, as a repository, okay, I'm cut off. Come to the workshop, come to the breakout group.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and you've now heard the elevator pictures. If you go down to the bottom bar, there are breakout rooms, and if you click the breakout rooms, you can see that you have a choice of going to either complex citations or the publication workflow. So if you select, you'll automatically end up in one of those rooms. And can I suggest, I think we've got 25 minutes for your breakouts and then come back. Okay, so.
Do we add ourselves, Leslie? Or
yes,
maybe
you got to add yourself.
we have to add ourselves to get in there, right?
Add yourself.
I'll hang around to make sure everyone gets into a room.
How do I get in there? Ah, nope.
Oh,
how do we end up in there, Shelley?
That's weird. I tried to get in and I couldn't get in. I'm going to try again.
Either. Interesting.
You're in it.
Am I?
Yeah.
No, Danny and Shelley are in the same room.
Oh.
Is there someone around who can help?
Danny, you're in the right room. Shelley
sweet.
is gone now.
Excellent. It just took some time to get here, maybe. Let's see.
The breakout gods retrieved her.
Whew. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I am going to start sharing my screen now. See what we get here. And
I've ended up.
Leslie, it sounds like you're just in my breakout with me, which is
no,
excellent.
I did. Sorry, with due respect, I'm worried about 7 people that aren't assigned, so I need to get back out.
Okay, understood. So let me take us to my slides. Okay, there we go. Can you all see that? Are you seeing
yes.
this? Excellent.
Drivers in history?
Yes. So for those who haven't heard of this, this effort, this began in the early winter of 2020, when the US Council of Data Facilities had hosted a series of webinars trying to connect repositories and journals. The driver on that was the journals who were generating repository guidance or criteria for authors to select repositories. And what was starting to murmur around the repository landscape was this challenge of the repositories trying to fit into that scholarly publication workflow. Several repositories that are domain repositories within the Council of Data Facilities were expressing this similar challenge. I am a repository manager that myself am taxed under this new workflow. But these authors and the repositories and the journals, they're very stovepiped in their own unique workflows, and they don't have a lot of opportunity to communicate across them. So in summer of ESIP 2020, we pitched this idea as a breakout, and it got a lot of traction. And we then started socializing this through consecutive meetings of opportunity. So on that timescale, you see RDA plenary 16, fall AGU, winter ESIP, and then in the spring of this year, AGU hosted, AGU and Coptis hosted a very specific targeted workshop to present this idea to a specific audience of journal publishers. So when it started back in the CDF and in these early session breakouts, we thought we would develop a visual workflow that would be used as a communication tool to help educate and inform and I guess achieve consensus on what we need to resolve these bottlenecks that are arising in the journal and repository workflows. So we came up, we started with the idea of a visual workflow that highlighted the touch points between researcher, repository, and journal. And we rapidly realized that the number of use cases specific to domain repositories it was very heterogeneous. It was hard to consolidate down into a generalized workflow. So we sort of started moving into the actions that can be taken at these touch points to help mitigate these stresses. And so over the course of several sessions at both ESIP and RDA, we've developed this set of recommendations. There's a set for both journals that you're seeing here, and we were shooting for very simple guidance and a low bar to implementation of this, and a lot of it is really cultural and communication. So set of guidance for the journals, which looks like help the author select an appropriate domain, institution, or general repository depending on their data and their funding circumstances. Give the author a sense of timing that they can take to the repository as that researcher interacts with the repository to preserve the data. And then and that should look like details of when the author can bring back the information from the repository about publication timings, what it looks like for the journal when they need a DOI, when they need that citation, and then communicate the need for peer review to have access to those data when they're needed at the repository. So that's what the journal recommendations came out looking like. The recommendations to repositories are to be able to enable that confidentiality for reviewer peer review of the data, and then I'm blanking now. Ensure that that there's a statement pertaining to this on the repository page for those data, but really it's the repository allowing access, confidential access to those data, and so these are the sets of recommendations that came out of several breakout groups. And we're looking at next steps within the ESIG working group here, or excuse me, IG here, to stand up a working group. And so what that would look like that's left, because we feel like we've been working at this for quite a while, is to review and consider the most recent feedback that we got from this summer's ESIP meeting to further refine and address any of these outstanding issues that might be associated with the recommendations, share them broadly and gather a final round of feedback, and then finalize and promote them through endorsement through RDA. So this was our suggestion to kind of move these along and start promoting them between repository and publisher communities. And so really what we're looking at here, oh, and this is some of the feedback that I was talking about. We don't necessarily need to go into this right now, but we did get considerable feedback at our last ESIP summer meeting, both on both sets of recommendations. And so we'd like to kind of dig into these and see, sort of vet them and see if we're still on the right track, or if we still need to go back and do some more tweaking. And so this is just a common set of feedback that we got out of the most recent breakout group that we sort of shared this effort with. And so here we are, and I think what I'm looking at for this particular breakout group right now is, does this all make sense? And are we on the right track? Is anybody here interested in carrying out or engaging with our working group as we stand this up? So far, I have been representing repositories, domain repositories within the Council of Data Facilities, a US organization representing data infrastructure in the NSF, the National Science Foundation domains. And then Shelley Stahl has been representing and supporting us on the publisher side through AGU efforts. And Leslie's been a great ESIG cheerleader for us. And so I've taken this stab at this, and you know, in full transparency, I'm relatively new to how to stand up a working group within RDA, and it seems like there is a lot of interest in this at these meetings of opportunity sessions. And so this is more of a validation and who's with me breakout group to see all of your feedback on, does this make sense? Should we move ahead? And if we're moving ahead, then I invite you to help work on the case statement and sign up for this working group. We've entered a placeholder at RDA, so you can go look at the case statement from the slide deck, or also from the session notes. You can reach out to me if you have any comments or would like to work on this. I think from the standpoint of just getting started, here are our thoughts on a working group. It would be within the Earth, Space, and Environmental Science domains, but we certainly want to reach out to other RDA communities for feedback on any drafts. We want to find out if we're missing any communities in this scope of the recommendations, and then figure out who else we should collaborate with within the RDA space. So that's my pitch, and I welcome your feedback. I think I'm actually supposed to gather some takeaways. So
yes, you are. But I haven't given
you're
you the
still here.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I can't work out. I thought I could actually stay in the main room. I can't work out how to do that. But what I wanted to say is, yeah, we'd like you to come back with 3 key points. And the number 1 key point is, you know, is it a go, no go to form a working group? Is there enough support from this? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So, yeah, and then as I said, put your key points there, or, you know, any notes anyone wants to add. So I'll hand back to you, Danny.
Great. Thanks so much, Leslie. So I'm going to jump into the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm just thinking about scope, because I can definitely see the value for the scenario that you've laid out in terms of being able to provide a way of aligning and calibrating expectations and the interaction and the timing between data providers, paper authors, and repositories and publishers. There's this dance that needs to go on, that where there's some additional information about probably both the publication timeline and expectations, though, you know, sometimes that may be, I don't know if it's better documented, but I think people look for it more habitually than what they might be looking at for repository workflows and timelines. But I think that this is probably a specific use case for a more general need of being able to contribute to the selection of an appropriate repository and deciding when to engage with it. And so thinking about connections with other RDA activities, and possibly looking at the case statement for this particular group, would it be worthwhile broadening it a little bit to actually expand the concept to maybe explicitly address repository metadata, which is, you know, what I was just actually scanning through, for example, the RE3 data repository metadata model. And that metadata model currently does not include elements that I think in the scenario you're describing are really critical. You know, what are sort of the normal expectations in terms of a curation review and process? Are there preliminary DOIs available during that review that could be integrated into a publication review and process? So I'm wondering if, number one, a broader focus on repository metadata to facilitate that identification and selection process that publishers certainly could use, but authors and researchers could also use it more broadly in terms of identifying repositories that they might be interested in. But then also thinking about other RDA groups that may be working not necessarily in the publisher repository intersection space, but maybe looking at metadata models or other methods for characterizing and understanding repositories.
Yes, so that is a great point that you bring up, and I agree with you. And I will say that there are those efforts that you just talked about, the how do we better describe repository metadata. There was a, you know, in the efforts to promote schema.org, there is a type, facility type that we can describe repositories in, right? And RE3 is, there are two potential efforts that might arise that are focused on this very topic that you're describing. So I'm not sure that we would fold that in and blow up the scope of this particular effort, but we would engage with that once it either becomes an RDA working group or it materializes in some other form. But we're aware of a couple of groups that are trying to crack that very nut that you just described.
So it could be a matter of this working group could take this use case into those other
I think discussions. Definitely. Right, and would inform that. One of them is trying to leverage the self-describing nature of the, you know, the repositories would publish their content out themselves, which would include, you know, we would extend that model, whatever it is exists now, to include things like timing or needs from authors or needs from journals or whatever that looks like. It would be a wonderful thing for these two groups to start to interface. So yes, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, definitely, with all these sort of Venn diagram of all these needs between repositories and journals. It's really challenging, and it's moving really rapidly right now. So I'm trying to get that into our notes as one of the takeaways.
Yeah, Daddy, I'd just like to add, I've raised this issue with a couple of repositories in Australia, and they're just not set up for it. I mean, they are set up to, here's a data set, in it comes, bang a DOI on it, shove it out the door. So this idea of having an interaction with the publisher, they're just not set up for it. And
right.
And yeah, and they can't kind of see the point. So what I'm hoping this working group will do is at least raise awareness that this is an issue and we have to deal with it. Bob's got his hand up. I'll
yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as I tried to communicate earlier, that I think a lot of the outcome of this working group is communication. You know, it's more outcomes than outputs. It's really getting the repositories and the journals and the researchers sort of in the same room to hammer out some just really easy guidance. It doesn't have to be as complex as standing up, you know, or publishing out some schema.org that describes your repository down to that granular level. I think that there's no awareness of the expectations across these communities right now. So even if this working group can provide that, I think that's a huge leap forward. So Bob, please go ahead. I see your comment about DOIs, so please.
Yeah, so I saw that recommendation where it went, I read it quickly, but it seemed to me to indicate that a DOI would be issued during the data review process, which is certainly problematic because often during the data review process, this is pre-publication, and you have people who would say, you know, the data have some issues with them, they need to be corrected, etc. And if that's the case, then you have either a new version, or it could actually end up being where they've modified the data set in some major way, even in the title, for example. It would be.
Yeah, let me provide a little clarity there. So the repository recommendations are to provide access for a peer review process to happen, and to have that happen confidentially. It doesn't require the data to be DOI'd at that point of peer review. And maybe what I showed too quickly without enough context was the feedback that came back from a breakout group during summer ESIP this year, when folks did say, hey, there are repositories that do this all the time. They give a preliminary DOI or even a placeholding DOI for the submitted data, and then whatever final data is published, you get a new DOI, or you get an updated DOI, or that's the one. You give them a handle, and then you give them the final DOI once it's published. And that's not feasible for all repositories. I completely agree with you on the limitations of that strategy. But what the journals are asking for is just access that is confidential, and that could be a share link.
I would strongly suggest that it's just a link, and you can tell them that a DOI, tell the reviewers and the editors that a DOI will be issued upon completion of the review process prior to the publication of the paper.
That's right, and that's where we've sort of reached our consensus across other repositories as well. So we're right in line with that strategy that you're mentioning. Yeah,
Thanks.
right. So yeah, absolutely. Leslie, I had a question for you, and now it just poof right out of my head. I think one of the things, let me see if I can get back to that.
Danny, Melissa, and Chris have their hands up, and you have 2 minutes
Thank
left.
you. Okay. All right, Melissa.
Hi, Danny.
Good to see
hey,
you.
everybody. To you as well. Here, I'll just turn on for a minute here. Just 2 quick thoughts. One is that the neuroscience community has been dealing with this issue for some time, because in the neuroscience field, reviewers have wanted to see the data sets before, as they're reviewing the publication. So interestingly, there might be some potential solutions that are fruitful, even if they're not going to work the same way or what have you. But I just thought I'd mention that. The thing I wanted to say, I picked up on your awareness and expectations, and you and I have talked about this, but I think this group would be also beneficial for providing feedback to some of the funding agencies that are in fact updating their policies around submission of metadata records for data. And the problems that you are describing with respect to this community I think that awareness issue goes in 2 directions. I think NSF also needs to really understand right down to the program officer level where these frictions are and real challenges as the policy is going to start to get rolled out for requiring data set metadata. So I'll stop there.
I totally agree. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I do think that the funder needs to be engaged in this process as well. you know, for repositories, I think it helps to have that funder guidance and backing to communicate to their awardees. So absolutely, thank you for that. Chris, I see that you're the last hand, and before we go, I need to get you know, a general consensus from all of you that I have online about whether this sounds like a go or maybe we need to rethink it. So Chris, go ahead, and then I'll try and touch base with everybody before we get yanked back.
You probably know that I go hand in hand with Shelley, so it's
yes.
it's like, yeah, sure. But I would say that we just went through an activity which might help here too, with like looking at the metadata that we need for, you know, just working with all of our journals as far as like the metadata from the repositories. So you know, when this gets started, I, you know, have some work I could share there. But the other thing too is that you know, we don't get enough questions through our data help desk initially about like when they're starting the process with authors. Now, one thing I've been sort of working on too is a forkable solution for taking our guidance as a project, basically, like in GitHub, and thinking of it in sense of like when you're starting your project, having the guidance even earlier on. And so like in a GitHub fashion, right? Having this available, and that might be another you know, idea. But one last thing too is I wonder if you thought about including, you know, as part of this group, the manuscript submission systems. You know,
listen, Chris, I think we're all back in the main room now. Is that correct?
It is. I think so. It looks like we all just.
Yep. Okay.
But there's some integrations with manuscript submission systems, you know, so it might be good to include them in the process. But
great, thank you. What I didn't get from my group was the thumbs up or thumbs down, sadly.
Anyway. Okay.
Carl has 2 for you. That looked good. Susan's got 1.
I missed it. Oh, nice. Excellent, Carl.
I think Kirsten had 1. Melissa has 1.
Sweet.
Okay, everyone, I'm just getting back. Oh gosh. Okay, all right. It's let me share the screen again. Hopefully it works this time. Yay. Shelley, can you start first, please, with
yes.
The report back from
yep,
that's 2, so we need to go back 1. Oh, Shelley, your slide's blank.
Yeah, I think I missed the directions that I was supposed to type.
Oh,
never mind.
I
have
She's got it all up in her head.
It's total. Well, no, I wrote it.
Is this number 1, which is A? Is this breakout a go, no go? Sorry, is the proposal for a working group a go, no go?
Oh, I think it's a go. Although I never asked that question, but everyone was pretty excited. So I'm gonna.
You have 5 minutes starting now.
Okay, it's a go. If anyone disagrees, say something in the chat, but otherwise we're all in. And the 3 things that will help inform our case statement, in addition to what's been happening in the working group thus far, is first of all, we need to really think through the relationships. We're calling this package product a reliquary. It's meant to be funny. I hope you laugh. It's a reliquary of curiosities. Trust me, we're going to drop that name as soon as we figure out, you know, what it is we're going to call it. But meanwhile, it's hysterical. So what's the relationship between the digital products that are included in the reliquary, and how does that inform us? So we've talked a little bit about that in the working groups, but that came up as something we really do need to pay attention to. So that was very good. And secondly, we need to really think through credit, because if credit is a goal, credit can be perceived in many ways, and we need to be very clear as to how we're going to enable that. And you know, what people can consider as being credit, I think we're talking about putting boundaries on what we're able to do, such that we're not promising or maybe building something too complex or not complex enough. And Jens highlighted a paper from the data versioning group, where they walked through the different kinds of credit that he felt would inform us. Oh, and Maggie had mentioned a product coming out of the data collections group that would also inform us as well. So that's really fantastic. And lastly, out of the blue, we started talking about the permissions. For me, it was out of the blue. Permissions having to do with the collection and who could be an author, who shouldn't be an author, and then do you have permissions to include all these other things in yet another DOI? And how do you figure that out? And we think we need to get the RDA legal group to help us out with that and walk up with us on this journey, or some legal group. So I'm excited.
Okay, so let's see if the excitement's the same in breakout session 2. So over to you, Danny. Is it a no-go? Go.
All right. Well, I think we're a guarded go. The brief discussion centered around the scope of the group and its relation to other communities and other efforts. So one of the things that came up was really a wonderful segue into another effort that might be bubbling up again alongside this one, and that's to have a extendable repository metadata model that would allow the repositories to include criteria about their own practices with respect to data publication for connecting to scholarly publications. So maybe put that into the activity that's sort of starting to gel right now in a number of communities. So that was one possibility. And then Melissa had a great suggestion to check out the neuroscience community, who has been working on this same issue for a little while now. So there might be some synergies or some lessons learned or use cases there that could help inform this group. And then she made the really strong connection, which we also did, and I glossed over and didn't really talk about it too much, but that's the really importance, the high importance of connecting to the funding agencies to help with this effort. Help on the awardee side, but help with the expectations of connecting repositories and authors. And then lastly, if Chris is still on, maybe he can help me with his suggestion at the very end about guidance, providing this guidance early on in the process, something similar to maybe Git space, but he's going to have to help me out there, and then also consider publication tools that exist right now that could help in this effort. So those were our takeaways. I think I got for the group that I had, I got a lot of good, sounds good to forge ahead. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay. Okay, so Chris, do you just want to quickly add something?
No, that was pretty much it.
Okay. I'll just add to Shelley's one. Are you aware of the ESIP research object citation cluster, in which they're running through all the roles that can go with the data set and arguing, should this person be an author? Should they just be in the acknowledgements, or, how you recognize it? Some very detailed work being done there.
Yes. We won't repeat what they're doing. We will wait for them to make a recommendation and then absorb. Yeah.
Okay, so, oh gee, I want to wrap up before I thank you for coming. I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming. I hope you like the format of this. Please get in touch if you've got a group that we'd like to highlight in our next RDA plenary. And more, thank you to the audience for sticking by. Do any of you have any comments or questions you would like to raise? Please raise your hand and say something, or put it in the chat. Or unmute yourself and say something. I'll ask my co-chairs. Helen, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so particularly, Leslie, but I have to say, if I put my tab hat on briefly, I think this session has worked really, really well, because I think there's been some really valuable information presented, but at the same time, there's been some really useful space to allow people to talk. And I'm, for one, I'm very mindful of the fact that while we're all still stuck on Zoom, having some more free-form time for discussion is incredibly valuable and helps people to sort of plow through these meetings, particularly at this time slot for those of us in Europe as well. So I would just like to add my thanks to everybody for contributing to the discussion today.
Okay. Douglas, you've got your hand raised. Could you
I
want
do
to
have
say
one
something?
quick, I do have one quick comment, which is the emerge of the cloud, the service provider, and all the data that a lot of people have been putting on the clouds, and how should that be involved in this discussion? Just because a lot of the some repositories moving to the cloud, but not all the repositories moving to cloud. So some providers or the data producers actually choose directly put their data onto the clouds, which currently they might not have DOI and how to cite those data. So how to involve those groups in this conversation would be also really interesting.
Thank you very much. Just passing to Shelley as a chair. Do you have any comment?
No, I'm incredibly excited at the engagement and thank you very much. It's been great getting the feedback and the interest.
Okay, Pedro, as a chair, do you have any comments? If you're still here, Pedro?
Yes. No, I think it was very, very nice. Great section. I'd like to thank you, Leslie, for this opportunity to share a lot of ideas. Thank you so much. Great section.
Okay, and finally, Danny.
I unmuted. Yes. I will echo Shelley in saying thanks for the enthusiasm and the participation and all the great feedback.
Okay, so if nobody else has any comments, I think we will finish up and well, join again at our next plenary. But like I say, it's bottom up, and please give us ideas of what you want in these sessions. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie.
Stop sharing.